everyone knows that I love authors, and I read so many books, or at least I review books. I look at them, and we don't often have huge amounts that we share with our readers, though, because a lot of people write good books, and I'm sure, but sometimes they just touch me. And when I read Edward William Polley's book, Ragwood, I was just turned on. And I don't know, I didn't even know what the word ragwood was, if it meant anything, but I just got into it. And so we have now featured it as a publisher's choice in our February issue. So if you've already gotten your magazine, you'll be able to read it. And then hopefully you're going to buy it, because it's I don't know how to explain this to people, Ed. It was very heartfelt. Even though there was some treachery in it, it was heartfelt. I felt good, and I loved the monk who was the star character.
Yeah, I'm glad you say it was heartfelt. This is actually the first thing I've ever done where it's a combination of everything I love compacted into one thing. That's how it came about, really.
And ragwood, does that mean anything to you?
Ragwood, it's just a word I made up a long time ago. It came from a song I love by a band called Fleet Foxes called Ragged Wood. So it's just a word I made up. I used it for a story that I wrote a long time ago that I never finished, which is actually where the first page of this book comes from, an unrelated story. Okay,
and I thought maybe it would be great for you as the author to read that to everybody as the first page. First of all, it was dedicated to mi amor, mi madre, mi amor. It's for those of you who don't speak Spanish. Of course, it's my mother. And I love when someone dedicates a book to their mother or their father. It's very special. So why don't you do that?
Well, she was kind of integral to just helping me bounce ideas off of and things like that. But the first page starts in a different font than the rest of the book and begins as such. Breathe. Breathe. Just breathe. He brought her grip closer to his lips for a kiss, though it nor his beard could be felt upon her determined hand, which was now firm and accustomed to his. If she had felt the kiss, it would have gone unnoticed, as unnoticed as the cold or the sight of her breath fog or the frozenness of her fingers and toes. The child within her was soon to come. The rotten interior of this frozen shack would be its first sight. Her effort was louder now. He was useless to her as this anonymous life fought its way through her belly. All he could do was be a hand to hold and wait for this new thing to introduce itself. He closed his eyes. The clawing at the door had grown. The beasts would soon be upon them. Ragwood.
That's right. That was enough to, to get me a little, say, well, what is in all this? So, and that was unusual to see in a book. Usually it's the foreword first or the acknowledgments. That's all by itself. So that kind of said a lot, didn't it?
Yes, it did. And the idea of structuring it that way came from my first book, which I haven't published. But there would be no title on the cover. It would have a first page that would kind of grab the attention or set up the story like that. And then you turn the page and it would be the title in big letters, kind of almost like a film where you have some sounds and then the title announces itself. You almost had to earn it a little bit.
And when did you know that you wanted to be a writer? How young were you?
I suppose I first got interested in words when I was 17 or so, listening to people like Jim Morrison, who maybe wasn't saying the best things, but just had such a fascinating way of putting words together. The line that always caught my mind was "the cars drive by all stuffed with eyes." It's a strange string of words, but it creates this image in your brain, and I was really interested in that. So, of course, at that age, I started writing awful poetry like every teenager does and didn't really go anywhere with it. But it wasn't until I came back, I went on a hitchhiking trip, and I got an all-night ride from Illinois to Virginia from this Czechoslovakian guy. His name was Lee. Just one of the coolest people you could ever meet. It's one of those characters you just don't meet very often. We talked all night long, and the next day I got off and we had a very nice goodbye. And I wandered around the Washington, D.C., waiting for my uncle to pick me up. He lived in that area. And I came up with an idea for a book, for a novel. So I came home and I started working on it, and that took a long time to do. It was very hard, the first one, trying to figure it out. And also, I was doing interesting things with structure and words. And that one's always going to stay in the shoebox. But this one, Ragwood, is a great introduction.
It was. And so did you literally take classes in writing, or is this just your own?
In high school, I took a creative writing class just because I liked the teacher. She was an English teacher I had that I really liked. But I got a horrible grade. I got like a D in it, I think. It was a very bad grade because I don't really believe in learning how to write. Those classes, they try to teach you how to have an imagination. And that's something you can't learn.
They don't teach you structure. I thought
they start to, but that gets in the way. Structure should come up naturally because the way it usually works is people do an outline, plot point 1, plot point 2, raising of stakes, so on and so forth, and then they try to write the book according to that outline. That never worked for me. I had to get lost in it. The way I always say is the difference between traveling and being a tourist. When you go to a city, you just walk around and you get lost and you find great things and great places. A tourist says, we need to be at this place at 6, we need to be at this place at 9, and it gets in the way. It really slows you up. For me, I was never good at that.
So do you have a favorite author? I mean, what's the genre you really like?
Oh, they all mix together for me. I don't really categorize things. I have a lot of writers I love, and for different reasons. There's people I love for their stories, and there's people I love for their styles. For example, Hemingway, to me, just for his style, I like his stories too, but just for his style, very straight to the point, he inspires your imagination rather than dictating it. And it's a beautiful thing, and he's a big influence. Cormac McCarthy's The Road is probably the most influential book I've ever read. If you've ever read it, you know he doesn't use parentheses. Often he doesn't use commas. And it opened my eyes that when it comes to fiction, there's no rules. It's like painting. You do what you need to do to get the image across to the reader, but you don't have to follow any particular grammar rules if they get in the way. And that was a beautiful thing. I love that.
And I was thinking, as you were saying that there are, of course, there are no, when I'm going to say pictures, I don't mean real pictures. You don't describe what the monk really looks like. You know, I mean,
yes.
And yet, so we take it on if he's tall, if he's short. I think he was short now that I'm trying to remember back. But no, I don't, you know, and I mean, so your characters were, now some of the mean guys, I mean, you know, you kind of talked about being big or looking like a tree or things, but you left it up to us to pretty much figure out.
Yeah, as I said, I really believe in inspiring the imagination, and I think it's by giving big details. I just do describe the monk by him having a beard, the hat he wears, him having a satchel, kind of his silhouette.
Yeah.
And I let you fill it in. And the reason for that is there are certain writers, they wouldn't describe their character fully at the beginning, so I'd picture one, and then later on they would say things, he had a goatee, but I was picturing someone completely different. And it dictates your imagination, and that's horrible. If you are going to describe someone, if there's something important about them, you have to say it at the very first instant you meet them. But as you were saying, you pictured him short. I never did, and other people never did. But I embrace that fully. I embrace that people see what they want to see, and you shouldn't get in the way of that, I think. A writer shouldn't. Right.
And no one seemed to be afraid of him. So he must, that was the other thing. He could go and walk into the worst places, but people, they stopped short of hurting him.
Well, the sudden circumstances he was very much in the way of being hurt a few times, but sudden circumstances unrelated to him kept him from being hurt in the story.
Yes.
But he's vulnerable like everybody else. It's very important that, and you see at the end, that he's just a guy. He's the unheroic hero, and I love that.
Yep.
The only unheroic hero I've ever come across in any fiction is Kwai Chang Caine from Kung Fu, which is a big influence on me and my life, and obviously on this book a little bit. And when I say unheroic hero, what I mean by that is he's gentle. He's not the hero. He's not like Captain America, people we idolize in this country, that they'll grit their teeth and they'll never stop fighting. They'll fight to the last stop. They'll fight for their ideals. This guy's not like that at all.
No.
He doesn't fight.
No.
Ever.
No. He's a kind person. And I love at the very end, too, he says, I just have to read this to you. He says, "This story is ended, but we will meet with the monk again in other far-off lands."
Yeah.
And you already know what you're going to do?
Well, when I wrote that page, I didn't. I was going for a walk, and the book was pretty much done, and I felt I needed something, and that just came to me. That line just, and I always follow my intuition and my instincts, and I just really felt like that needed to be there. And I've heard from quite a few people who read it that was their favorite part. That it gave them such a thrill. And when you end a story, you should feel as though you've accomplished something, and also you should feel fulfilled in some way. Often books will leave you just a little short. There'll be great books, and then they just end, and you kind of want more, but it's over. But to answer your question, I know where I want to send them. There's 2 more places I want to send them. Just for certain images and things, but the stories are still very loose. But I always figure that out as I'm doing it.
When the very beginning, when I started reading, I thought, oh, no, it's a zombie book. And I don't like zombie books.
No, it's not a zombie book.
But it wasn't. No, I know that. Because I think I said that. It's not a zombie book because I don't know. That's a different genre for me. I don't like that. But yours was interesting. And then the cover with the crucifix, but then
it's a rosary.
It's a rosary.
And it has the moon going full on the beads.
Right.
If you read the story, you'll understand why that's there. The monk carries a rosary, so that's him. But the evolution of the moon, it's very symbolic in just about every mythology and religion, but specifically alchemy, which means not coming of age, but the spiritual fruition of a person, someone almost blooming as a person.
Mm-hmm.
And that's unrelated to him. That's somebody else.
No, okay, but and the thing that I picked up too is, I don't know, it must have been in something. It said, "There are things in those woods from which nightmares took lessons, and you go alone."
Yeah,
it was.
I keep a notebook where I draw images and write lines, and then when I'm working on something, that's where I put a lot of ideas and corrections and things. That was just a random line that when I wrote in there, and when I was writing this book, I had to find a place for it. It's too good. It's too cool a line.
It was.
And if you look up the book on Amazon or Kindle, that's the only blurb you're going to get. Because the best way to go into this book is cold, knowing absolutely nothing.
Right. Yeah, and I didn't want to, in the review, I didn't want to tell people too much about things. I mean, even what ragwood means. I just wanted people to know there was I like the idea that there's this pregnant woman whom he helped, and of course the fact that he was always meeting these terrible things out there. I mean, I couldn't even place where they were. I mean, this country, it's out of space. I don't even know where this is.
In a way, it's meant to be that. It's influenced by a lot of folklore that I love, of different countries. But there's certain films I love, like James Whale's Frankenstein, which did something very interesting. When you watch it, you don't really know where you are. People speak with English accents, but it's like a German town. There are cars, but there's no phones. It's kind of like a Neverland, where it's anywhere. It could be anywhere in any place, and I love that. This was very influenced by Slavic folklore, so it's kind of in those woods. But it could really be anywhere.
Well, actually, I think now that happens with emails. People can write you. Yeah. They could be anywhere. You have no idea where they are.
Yeah.
It's what's happened in our world.
Yeah. And again, it allows your imagination to build kind of whatever imagery you want. Mm-hmm. In the place, I talk about certain structures, building structures, that don't really have any historical realism to them, but they feel real when you read the book. And that's kind of important.
A book we had, let's see, I think it was the book of the month, called Radio Men. It's very science fiction, but she's written 3 other books, and we featured them because she always winds up winning awards. And you ought to talk to her too, because she said that being a writer is really a lot of hard work, not only just in the writing, but getting these awards, knowing where to send your stuff and all that.
Oh yeah, that's my blind spot.
Well, she's really nice. You need to get in touch with her. This Eleanor Lerman is fantastic, and I think she'd help you. She just retired, but she's really is a very, very well thought of. She does poetry, she does novels, And this last one she wrote was fantastic. I mean, I
I'd love to
love
read
science
it.
fiction. Yeah. So anyway, but I wanted to pursue this this further with you. I wanted one thing. One of our columnists lives in California, and he's probably the world's maybe most noted linguist.
Mm-hmm.
And he said to him, because I asked him, who is the best writer? And for him is William Shakespeare.
Well, because he's a writer, of course.
I mean, and so is that how you feel about William Shakespeare?
No, not necessarily. I've been very moved by his works. I have memories of I remember I had an opportunity to go to the Dirty Jumpsuit Party, we have an air show in Stewart.
Yes, I know it. You do. I've been there.
The night before, they do the show in the dark, and then they do fireworks. And I turned it down, and that night I read Hamlet by myself, and by the time I got to the end, the fireworks were going off in the distance, and I felt like it was a night well spent reading that for the first time. I'm not too well versed in his work. I've read a handful of plays, and don't get me wrong, he's great.
Yeah.
But he's just doesn't gel completely with me.
Uh-huh. No, he said that he felt he was the finest writer of all times, and all the things.
Probably just for his diversity and the sheer volume of his work in the short period of time.
Yeah, maybe that's true. Do you ever see yourself writing then, and I guess you kind of answered that you'd like to do a movie or you'd like to do something a little bit more active with your stories?
Oh, well, I see in shots the way this book, everyone who's read it says they see it as a film, and that's because in my brain, when I'm picturing it as a film, not as though I'm there, but I'm seeing the shots as a director. Where would I focus? What would the sound be to get the emotion across? How would I get the sense of motion? Things like that. And I try to write the shots into the words, and I think that's why everyone says it comes across as a film.
Ah, yes, that's interesting. So you wrote it actually as a film, and so you know. Also,
that's why it's the length that it is. You can read it in the time it takes you to watch a movie.
Yeah, that really appealed to me, but you really do read it again, and this is the kind of thing I would read over and over. I mean, you know, there are just a lot of things.
It would value to read it.
It's very simple, but
over and over again, and it is an act in simplicity, and it was meant to be from the beginning.
Right.
It's actually structured off the structure of a fairy tale, which to me is the perfect narrative structure. And they work in a beautiful way in that you can take from them whatever you want. You can read them at whatever level. You can read them just as a pure fun read, and it works. You could see them as something intellectual and psychological, and it works. You could read them as something spiritual, and it works. Basically, wherever your mind is how you'll interpret the fairy tale. And the same goes for this book. You can read it on any level, and it's satisfying. And there's a lot of layers, and it's, as I said, it's very simple. But in art, the hardest thing to pull off is simplicity. You got to really trim and trim and trim and trim until you get it.
Yeah, you're right. It's very hard to cut things back. My guest is Edward William Polley. It's Polley.
Yes.
Okay, make sure I do that right. And he's only 24, but he's old for his age. It's his first book, and we call it a novella because it's a shorter book, but it's still, there are a lot of other books like this, and we don't call them novellas, but he believes that this is going to be something that people are going to be interested in. I believe that, and I hope that people will get it. It's called Ragwood, Raggwood, and he lives in Stewart, Florida. And I thought it was his first book, but obviously he's written other books. He just hasn't let them go out yet.
Not yet.
And now he's writing a children's book, what will that be about?
Well, I wrote an I've been working on a novel since August. Right after I finished this, I jumped into a novel which is the longest thing I ever read. One thing great about Ragwood is it really gave me, I wouldn't say more confidence, but it made me a little more comfortable with my intuition. I knew that I could do it. I could write something as long as I've written, and now I'm revising it. But I was feeling a little burnt out on the novel in November, so it took a month to write and illustrate a children's book, which it's unlike any children's book I've ever read. It's very emotionally intense, but I think I found the right publisher with Chronicle. I submitted it to them and only them because of a great book they published called Shadow by Susie Lee. I don't know if you've ever heard of it.
No,
but it's a very interesting piece, and she's done a few books that are just as interesting that I highly recommend.
And do you do the illustrations yourself?
I did. That book took me a day to write, and it took me a month to illustrate. It was because
So you're an artist.
Well, that's why it took me a month. I'm not a good artist. The way I would do it is I would redraw the same image again and again and again until I got lucky and it came out just the way I wanted, or until I knew it wasn't going to get any better. But that's also, it's emotionally powerful, and it's also very simple, and the illustrations illustrate that, the simplicity of the story and the simplicity of the illustrations. But I have another one in mind that I'm going to work on soon.
This is great. It's so wonderful to talk to a young author who has so much in front of him. So tell me the problem with why kids don't read books today. I know I have one of my answers, I think, but what do you think?
Well, I was a late bloomer when it came to reading. I didn't really start reading till I was 17 or 18. I'd read a few books, but I hadn't really come across the ones that moved me. And I think a reason for it is in school, they make you read books. And granted, sometimes they're great books, like To Kill a Mockingbird. But being told what to read, it really takes away the fun and the thrill of finding something that's personally great for you. I remember I was a teacher's aide in high school, and they were making the kids read Frankenstein, which is my absolute favorite book of all time.
Yeah, that's what you were saying.
And they hated it. They just hated it because they were forced to do it. So they were kind of just mechanically reading the words. They weren't feeling the emotions of the story. And I think that's what happens. I started reading when I discovered Che Guevara's The Motorcycle Diaries, which I don't condone his political ideas.
I understand,
but that story, it's really a beautiful story.
And who actually wrote it?
I'm sorry?
Did Che Guevara really write it?
Yeah, it was.
Did he really?
He did. He was a medical student in Argentina, and when he was about to graduate, he went on a road trip on a motorcycle with his best friend through South America. And traveling through the continent, they met all kinds of oppressed people and beautiful people, and that's what opened his eyes to human suffering in the world.
Yes.
And that's kind of what directed him. But it's that story of self-discovery through travel, which later led me to Into the Wild, and then Jack Kerouac's On the Road, which is a common book for teenagers, but in Florida, I guess schools aren't that good. Nobody knew what that book was when I was reading it. And I was kind of losing interest in school, so I wouldn't really I'd be reading instead of paying attention to what the teachers were saying. But they always thought I was reading interesting books, so they kind of let me slide with it.
Did your mother read to you when you were little?
She did. The first book I ever read, and I think it's just because I remembered the words, I didn't actually read it, was How the Grinch Stole Christmas, which is still, I think, one of the best books ever written. I still remember I couldn't read it. I just remembered the whole thing verbatim. But I've been told I'm a bit dyslexic. Mm-hmm. But no one ever told me. I had a great fourth grade teacher. She told my parents, I think he's dyslexic, but let's not tell him, and he'll get over it. And I did. I still have it, but I never knew I had it, so I just got over it, I suppose.
That's Dr. Seuss, isn't it? The
Dr. Seuss's How the Grinch Stole Christmas, yeah.
So, yeah, I mean, that's a fantastic thing what he came up with, the way he writes. And there's and the places you'll go. Did you ever read his? Don't forget that one. No, you do it now as an adult.
Oh.
It's because I got it as a graduation gift when I got my master's degree, and I've given it. It's appropriate for everyone because the horrible places. I mean, it's scary, and it's true. As we just graduate and get into life, it's very scary, the places you're going to go. But then some are nice and some are bad, and you don't worry about it. There'll be another turn. You need to get this. And I think it's the places you'll go. Yeah, by him.
Yeah.
Do make sure you get it. You'll keep that. You'll love it because I'm sure it's perfect for you right now. Because we're all scared of the things that are happening to us and where we're going to go. One never knows that. So it sounds like you're going to travel. Do you feel you have to travel now to get more fodder for all this?
No, the traveling for me, I understood one day I was skipping school and I was standing by the ocean listening to Karina by Taj Mahal, and I just had this incredible feeling of freedom, and I decided this is what I want. I don't care if I'm homeless. I don't care what happens to me. I want to feel like this instead of that grind to accomplish things that you feel in school and then later in work.
Sure.
That you need to. There's always a schedule and there's always things you have to get done, and it's kind of stressful. And I decided I'm going to try to find a way around it. So I decided I'm not going to go to college because there was nothing I wanted to go for anyway. And I graduated on a Thursday, I think, and the next Monday I was on a train to go out. And it wasn't to see things or go places or anything like that. It was just to be alone for a couple minutes. And the second I hit the desert, I hitchhiked and I got a ride into the Utah desert. The second I got there, it was at a crossroads, fitting enough, and there were no cars for miles and miles and miles. It was like being in the ocean. You could just see the land, and there was no sound but the wind in your ears. And I understood at that moment, this is the farthest I've ever been from anyone who knows me. I'm hundreds of miles. I'm by myself in the desert. This feels incredible, I felt. And I think that's just what kids need, is just to be alone for a minute. Because everywhere they go, people are telling them what they need to do. Or if they say they want to do this, they have to be like an intellectual and be able to express why this is the wrong road for them. So just to be alone for a few minutes was great for me. And I really needed that. And of course, meeting certain people influence certain ideas. But I don't feel I need to travel. I still have that feeling of freedom sitting in this room right now with you.
Well, so you take who you are with you, no matter where you are and what you're doing. You know, you'll be. I mean, you can sit there and envision anything. You look outside and see things. I mean, I see things in the clouds, of course. I mean, but that everybody does that. Well, I want everyone to know that you can actually get this book, and I think you ought to buy it. I don't even know what you're charging for this book.
To download it, it's only $2.99.
I mean, you can't even buy a candy bar for that. $2.99. You should do that. It's called Ragwood. Raggwood. It's a very special book, and I'm sure that you could even get the real one, and he'll autograph it for you if you want after you read it. But we thank you very much for coming in, Ed, and please do stay in touch with us. I want to read some of your other books.
Of course, coming soon.
Yeah, thank you.